Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. The title of today's episode is An Endless End to an Endless Beginning. And really, the inspiration of this episode came from me realizing the fragility, futility of the human mind as it gazes upon a temporal condition, a temporary condition. There's this poet by the name of Sadi, Saadi. And this poet finds himself in one moment where he's telling his mother, he's asking his mother to forgive him. And he says, "Mother, forgive me because all the sins that I have led to have originated from you." And then he tells his mother that in some sense this life is like a ball of wool, a ball of yarn, where it has no beginning or end. And of course, Sadi was a mystic, but in his poetic vision, he saw a state of being that had no ignition, had no beginning or end. Now, in the title, I say an endless end to an endless beginning is because human consciousness appears. We can say, in some sense, appears out of nowhere. If you went 100 years ago, I would not exist. And suddenly my humanness, my consciousness, all of it has been in some sense opened suddenly in the world, as if the eyes of intelligence have opened as man in this universal sector. There's a quote from Leo Tolstoy where he says the sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. If we take into consideration that it's as if there's this program of existence going on, we suddenly awaken in the middle of the program, we have access and exposure to a certain range of the program, and then we in some sense exit the system. Now, if consciousness is kept around, it will feel it in some sense began from nowhere. How can I tell you? It's as if from space, from emptiness, there was something to see itself. There was something to see, you know. Ooh. Pretty much, guys, the idea is that in order to have existential contentment, The human being has to have an ability to acknowledge its temporary dimensions, and only after it has found contentment with a temporary condition of its existence, it will be open to experiencing more than the temporary. This doesn't mean eternal. This doesn't mean something too out of this world. The implication is that we're conscious beings, we're in a certain form. This form is around for a certain time. While we exist in this form, there is a vision that can be applied. There's, in some sense, you can say, when the world enters the eyes of the human being, it transforms into purpose and action. We can approach the idea from an ancient Greek view, in the sense that Heraclitus said, "No man steps in the same river twice, and it is not the same man, and it is not the same river." So what it, in some sense, guys, I'm just trying to entertain the notion that consciousness is continuous to itself and it doesn't know anything more than that. What that means is our intelligence only knows about existing. It doesn't know about not existing. Unconsciousness doesn't mean non-existence. Unconsciousness means the consciousness to existence is not accessible. I wonder how far imagination is going to reintroduce the world in new dimensions. Conscious experience traveling through unconscious existence. We find ourselves really, now looking at it, the human condition is one where we tell the journey, we tell the story about our journey to ourselves. They say there is an objective birth and then there is a subjective birth. The child comes into existence, yet its body's intelligence is in the unconscious hand of nature. It's still nature functioning, the child. When nature functions, the child with that does not have an ideological self. How would I say it? It's as if the child will not understand its chaos. So what's really fascinating is that we first need order to have chaos in our lives. We first require a conscious existence to even wonder about what's after non-existence, or what non-existence is. So really, man, his eyes have opened to design, and as he is a changing design, the eyes are moving through the designs. Right now, when I think about my human body, I see that this body is, believe it or not, it's a design. Okay, and this biological design has been changing. It's as if the same freedom to move and change that is given to the whole human being is given to every cell in the body of the person. The idea is that nature doesn't stop from changing, but it all matters. It depends on what it's building. So imagine, like, let's say we take this Leo Tolstoy quote to the next level, where he says the sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. And let's say that we woke up into a world where every human being was in a high, energetic, and kind of pleasant, kind of excited state to be alive, simply because their humanity, that humanity had an acknowledgement of them. So imagine it's like you opening your eyes to a world where everybody is helping build something great. Now, this thing that gets built, people come in and people leave. People enter the system, contribute to the system, and then leave the system. People come to the party, celebrate in the party, and then they leave the party. I understood something early on, that the door of the mind must be opened with the hands of the real self. That means in this life, I find people are in simulations unless they are responsible for the whole moment as the whole moment. But the completion of the whole moment means it's unknown. So something that I find that the species will get more acquainted to in the coming years. And it is the realization of the self of selves, of the meaning being more important than how the meaning arrives. Human beings are calculating to survive in more efficient ways, only to find that in their calculation they are only saving their reality. I truly agree with Leo Tolstoy. The sole meaning of life is to serve humanity, because humanity is the opportunity of a lifetime, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't know how the whole species has occupied itself with many other stories other than the one story that really matters. There are people who believe in entities beyond this world. There are people who believe in so many stories. There's stories that we see this whole planet as just a rock in space. There's stories that we see this whole planet as a thought of the will of a creator. There's stories that it's like this, it's like that, it's like this, it's like that. The stories are endless. But one story that is really crucial is what the human being can do that contributes to your greater self. So here's the idea, guys. Imagine right now your greater self is a collective humanity. What does that mean? Imagine your greater self is every being. Imagine you have attained a state of consciousness where your body doesn't just define with the limits of just a certain ideology. In the same way, I can, in some sense, in this moment, my real name is Amin, A-M-I-N. And in this moment, as I can see myself as Amin, I can also see myself as being a galaxy. You see, the mind is imbuing life and then relating to it. Do you know what that means? That means that there's a sort of intricate balance between doubt and acceptance that leads to the story of life. Leo Tolstoy says joy can only be real if people look upon their life as a service and have a definite object in life outside themselves and their personal happiness. That definite object is the potential of the species. You see, I dwelled too long in my own suffering. I was cooked into a crisp by my own storytelling when I was younger. I would look at the world and its meaninglessness was easier to grasp than its meaningfulness. It took a long time until I realized that nobody knows. That every living human being on some level is reacting to a potential emptiness of all meaning. I saw this when I saw not just my grandparents who are getting close to moving above their 80s, but it's just, I see it in human beings where life gives them weakness. Now, let me tell you something that when I was younger, I felt this was a disadvantage, but as I'm growing older, I'm seeing it was a remarkable, strange blessing, a hidden blessing. You see, in my youth, I found myself in many moments of not just disappointing myself, but embarrassing myself in front of myself, but just also failing in, I don't know, public situations. Not as public as you may think, but like what I mean by that is I failed. I was rejected and embarrassed. And in my youth, I felt as if the world didn't want me here. I later on understood that no human being can live and not experience change, not experience loss. And I realized in my youth, where I was powerless to the forces that were in some sense, I felt there was another power involved. I realized that the being whose eyes are still open after failure is the winner. The winner is not the person who won. The winner is the person who, regardless of the outcome, still kept their eyes open. And I noticed that when I was embarrassed in my youth, then when you, in some sense, when you're much older, it doesn't even matter. The ideological landscape doesn't even arise in the same way. I find that life is a moment where the design can be extracted in any way. Every moment that you have felt you have suffered, the mind has had a potential to see the opposite. Every moment you've experienced joy, the mind has had a potential to see the opposite. The way nature has designed the human being is that it cannot get attached to itself too much. This is why there's a lot of wisdom in ancient traditions about detachment. Because attachment means identification. Identification means assigning one's being to phenomena. Leo Tolstoy says, the changes in our life must come from the impossibility to live otherwise. then according to the demands of our conscience, not from our mental resolution to try a new form of life. I find that I think there's something off with that quote. I don't know if it's written right, but anyways, there's another quote Leo Tolstoy has. I have the page here. He says, "An arrogant person considers himself perfect. This is the chief harm of arrogance. It interferes with a person's main task in life, becoming a better person." You do not become a better person just because you did actions that people clapped for, that ethical people clapped for. There is a mystery, and I call this the living mystery of the unknown reality. We cannot see after some point. The mind, the subjective realm, people may think, I can imagine anything. But guess what? Unless the blueprint is put, you cannot. Imagination doesn't open up without an identity behind it being able to put the story and narrative. You can say that when you, in some sense, when a person learns language, then in some sense experiences can be identified. The human being is going through a very profound categorization phase. You know, it's like the names we give us define us only to realize we could have given any other name. We could have given any other story. Instead of thinking that we messed up the world, we can think we actually built it well, you know? As Leo Tolstoy says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. And guess what? When you change yourself, you're changing a part of the world. That's the best place to start, by the way. That means if you want to help someone, start by helping yourself, but do not help yourself in a hierarchical value system. There is something called decent, simple being. It's like in the simplest version of you wonder what it would do in a situation, and also wonder what the complex version of you would do in a situation. You would see simplicity must arise from seeing the world as simple. You cannot experience a simple self if you're in a complex world. If you think this world is too complex to lead to anything, guess what? You think the world is too complex to lead to anything. You see, man, it may take many, many, many years to build a house, but it can be demolished in an instant. Now, I find it for the subjective realm, it's the opposite. An idea can be created in an instant, and it could take many years for the idea to go away. Some philosophers wondered if the idea of heaven was a disservice or was a service to man. The idea of knowing there is something better than here. You can say the idea of heaven is, you can even see it similar. It's like the idea of a future self. We say people want to go to heaven, you know? And we at the same time realize that when a person enters the state, enters the world, they have to be of the world. You see, Christ has an interesting quote. He says to be in the world but not of it. But I find if you want to be in the world, you have to associate to being of it. I have this next level hypothesis that I think the reason that Abrahamic traditions speak about kind of the world starting, fundamental creation is speaking about 6,000 years ago, the world starting. I think that was when the first ego came. the first identification. You know, it's like first in the religious text, it says first was the word. It's as if like somebody shouted human and humanity arose. Whether the person sees a story to the cosmos or not, they will realize that free will is the opportunity to shape something that's also being shaped on its own. Do you know how many nights I have literally come home at the end of the day, and I've wondered for how long does existence play with manifestation? You see, when you move beyond the language threshold, when you can observe thoughts like objects, they don't bother you anymore. You know, you can engage them from various angles. You can contemplate reality from many dimensions, but the idea is that what you observe no longer you are. You see, what you think you are, you feel. This is strange, but the person may feel what is their responsibility is much more harder than what is somebody else's responsibility. It's the effort of action. Human beings should just understand the human design is, it's a shape, it's a design. Imagine some like Einstein, what's his name? Edison made Einstein. I was about to say that. Edison Edison made the light bulb that made Einstein be able to write his theory. But Edison, he invented something that had a utility. And so really life is about realizing the value of the design, the value of the moment. Guys, I'm reading Leo Tolstoy quotes, and he has this thing where he says Nietzsche was stupid and abnormal. I don't know how the relationship with Russia and Germany was back in the day, but but I know that there's no voice that exists where an ear is not meant. It's like every sound is like an invention with a utility. I don't know how to say it, dear listeners, but we are unknown movements within known creatures. Mr. Within is concluding this unknown movement will eventually, in a period of, let's say, 150 years or something, like it's going to be acknowledged as a field. So imagine children rediscovering a silent bond. You see, it's as if, think of the same bond you have with your sibling. Think of someone you're close with, the kind of bond you have. Now I want you to imagine you have that bond with a member of your species. Because if you know, there was a situation where, like the movie Independence Day, humanity was under attack by an extraterrestrial force, it would be the rise of the terrestrial unity. It would be a sort of unification of humankind. That you would suddenly feel like, imagine in a sci-fi setting, you're a human being and you're in a place where after like 10 years you see one other human and there's extraterrestrials in the civilization too, Star Wars themed, something like that. So what I'm saying is, the situation is that moment when you see a being from realities that are familiar to you, you in some sense understand what this humanity is that Leo Tolstoy talks about, which is the sole purpose of, you know, the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to make sure the greatest vision finds the greatest eyes. Civilization in 2020 does not require any more. How would I say it? The species doesn't require, let per se, too much technological advancement. It just needs emotional stability, because in the subconscious minds of all human beings, there's the confrontation of the void and the empty vision. Okay, so the void is there. When you acknowledge the void, you have a sort of comfort with it. When you don't acknowledge the void, in some sense, it shocks you. And of course, the void will shock everyone at its core. There was a moment where I felt I was, in some sense, like I felt my attention and my breath was leaving my body. And in that moment, it was strange, because there came this wind that I felt was, in some sense, I had to let go of everything I had held on to. You see, there's some things that a person, imagine you hold in your hand, but there's certain things that have to do with the identification of the human being, which are ideological landscapes the being is holding on as valid. In that moment, even my subjective realm was being pushed aside. It was as if the winds were too strong. You see? And the winds of evolution find the temporal being. It is the greatness of the caterpillar's life to enter the cocoon that is meaningless, yet the meaning is seen from higher dimensions, from wings that the caterpillar's feet could never understand. So one has to trust life, and that means not only trust its known dimensions, but also to trust its unknown dimensions. To be honest, the known dimensions you can articulate, you can calculate, you can in some sense perceive from various angles and then decide. But in some sense, when it comes to the unknown, Mr. Within will say trust it, because what else can man do? What else can the explorer do than to move forward? You see, I like the idea of how life is about exploration, but I don't think it should be an obsession only on the objective realm. The exploration of reality is now moving to a point where, because humanity has such a sophisticated language and a sophisticated awareness to language, he can in some sense now study states of mind. And states of mind are suggestions of how the body is keeping the world in a certain way, rather than the world keeping the body in a certain way. Leo Tolstoy also has this awesome quote, guys. He says, boredom, the desire for desires. Emotional stability means that the civilization has to calm down from the skies of self-proclaim. Treat your mind as an antenna. as a biological multidimensional antenna. This antenna gives you an ability to receive, but strangely this intelligence also can express. So you are not just a signal receiver in this world, you are a signal provider. Every human being is like this. You, whether you know it or not, your subconscious mind is talking to the whole cosmos. Whether you know it or not, your unconscious mind is the ears that listen to that voice. Leo Tolstoy also says it is amazing how complete is the delusion that beauty is goodness. Oh, I mean, this is obviously understandable in nightclubs, but it's very true that just because something is beautiful doesn't mean it is good. Just because something is beautiful doesn't mean it is efficient. Just because something is beautiful doesn't mean it is necessary. Do you know how many incredible ideas that have been like mountains that I've climbed to the peak and then I had to climb down because I just felt civilized. The human mind is not ready to absorb certain truths, certain articulate ways that things are happening. You know, it's as if like man, it's possible for the human being to fathom communicating to another human being, but the concept of the idea of a human being being able to communicate to an atom, to an electron, the idea is that I think what's happening with science, especially on the quantum level, when it comes to the double slit experience and the observer effect, that the experimenter, as the attention of the experimenter's sphere of existence influences the project. It's as if we're looking at top particles that are on such a subtle, tiny level. Imagine it's like somebody wants to see what the tiniest particle is doing and suddenly realizing the person attempting to experiment is changing the experiment. Do you know what that means? That means even if man wanted to conduct the greatest experiments, he would be in his own way. Reality is not about evidence. What evidence do you need? It's changing. It's changing all the time. The person, even you get the evidence that's being brought to society, that society is changing. Society is not just again, as I emphasize, is not just a rational place. It's many irrational stories can balance the person and also imbalance the person. You see, my grandparents, for example, they're old, and they're religious. They're Muslim people, you know, and it's as if since I remember in my childhood they would give these kind of like, of course, in the Shia Islamic tradition. I just remember being a little kid and my grandparents kind of opening the parking lot of their house in the neighborhood, and just there was a day where they would just give food. Houses just give food. It's like many people don't understand this, but don't know this, but in the Islamic tradition, it's kind of like 10% of whatever the human being gains, they must give back. You know. To the community or something. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that for their minds, the idea of a creator brings more contentment. They feel more comfortable living by feeling that the universe is under the control of some ultimate power. You see, just like a child lost in a mall, many human beings feel we're just here and now what? And in that now what, we have time to simulate. And as we simulate, we go towards realities that are closer to the design of our eyes. Do you know, once I remember when I truly comprehended the implication of biology, I realized that what genetics is that none of my ancestors, it's as if one pattern continuing rather than one pattern being many different patterns. It's kind of like my DNA is experiencing my ancestry and even me up to this point Just like how my moment of being is experiencing various senses of self throughout the years of my life as I experience. Every person, they change, you know. You cannot, the thing is, experiences change, and it's only a new experience that can bring forth a new reality of control. So if you're a person who still is playing the games of suffering, that means it's okay for you to exist and suffer. The faith in the whole moment is a resolution. If we think that the brain is just projecting reality, well, guess what? You can project any story. And guess what? You can project the story to your heart's content. To be honest, I was a bit, just a tiny bit nervous speaking about language in these talks because just like how Lao Tzu says, the Tao that can be spoken about is not the real Tao. It's an it's an experience, and because it's an experience, words only cover it, only mask it in different ways. Living is different to thinking. Thinking, believe it or not, conceptually doesn't even make sense. The fact that you're a thought, thinking that you're a thought is meaningless, you know. It was let me tell you, it was a cop out. It was a philosophical dam. It was a blockade. That means, let me tell you what happened. In order to create stability for one ideology, that ideology must silence the voice of other ideologies. Now, this ideology that is silencing the voice of other ideologies will suddenly realize a blunder of eons, that in some sense, control is not the ultimate. You see, if we think people have to control people, people are just struggling to control themselves. That's why we have violence. Now we want people to control nations. Now we want people to, so in some sense, the civilization is finding that we have to redirect the attention to an ability of a collective kind. So this is why I think when a human leader, what a human leader couldn't do, an ideological law or consideration could. You see, Leo Tolstoy has this quote. He says, truth, like gold, is to be obtained not by its growth, but by washing away from it all that is not gold. The alchemist realized that he had to turn, just like lead into gold, the simulation into reality. And the only way an illusion can be true is to realize that the illusion is being experienced by the truth. The whole mystical thing idea is that, even Rumi said it, what you seek is seeking you. You are here to be aware of the experiencer, but because the experiencer is looking for the experiencer, unless it stops, it will not find itself. Unless the ripples of the pond settle, you will not honor your being. Because let me tell you, I started off from being a very shy and I had very low self-worth. That's why I was quiet most of my life. Not be quiet because out of a wise kind of observance. I was quiet because I just felt like out of place in my world. Only when I saw with the eyes of my whole moment of being was when it was a kind of like, oh my God, oh my God, this reality is not ideological. So your karma changes when you let go of certain ideological masks that you're wearing. Think of karma as a reaction of the world to what you do. Right now I'm giving this talk, it will have a karmic influence. Now I could sit down and think, oh my God, what am I going to do? What's going to happen? Who's going to hear this talk? Oh my God, what are they going to do? Oh my God, oh my God. Like I could think like this, think as if the consequence is inefficient or efficient, but I have realized there is something here that can be nowhere else but here. This is why simplicity is divine. You always see a man is bewildered like an animal suffering, but the gods are in the clouds in a state of ultimate perfection. As if the gods in ancient Greece, they came from perfection to imperfection, but man was going from imperfection to perfection. A bewildered animal had to calm down. And the gods in some sense who were in some sense from the ultimate state had to come into an archetype. You see, the world can be given dimensions, but at the end of the day, the experience it flows in accordance to nature. An endless end to an endless beginning pretty much means a spinning circle. It means in Zen, they draw a circle. Let me see if I can find the picture. There we go. Just a second, guys. I'm just getting the picture for you. Okay, so this is a sign in Zen. Oh my God, it's so. There we go. Life is cyclical. As the body goes through the seasons of the world, so does the mind go through its seasons. And so do the leaves of the tree of the mind, the thoughts of the human being, they change as the seasons come and go. By realizing this, there comes ultimate contentment in every moment. That means I thought to myself, what is the situation? Is death a separate experience, and then life a separate experience, and the change in between a kind of separate experience? And then I realize it's as if in every moment that the mind has been able to see a sort of narrative of things going away, the mind could have seen a narrative of things coming together. There's the story of this farmer, and this farmer, one of his horses, his prize horse, kind of like runs away. Now the neighbors come up to him and they're like, "Oh my God, man, your horse ran away. You know, you're so unlucky. Oh my God, you know, like your only horse ran away." It's like, what are you gonna do? You know, like they're trying to bug the guy, right? The farmer says, "How do you know it's bad luck? Do you know? How do you know it's unlucky? Maybe it's not." You know, the guy says maybe. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. This sudden thing happened. I just had to handle it. All right, let's get back to this. We are painting meaning with sound in the silence of emptiness. The human experience has access to I guess I'll say it, visible and invisible realms. Really, there isn't there isn't much really the human being can do aside from handling their objective existence and then contemplating their subjective coexistence with the world. And then eventually beyond that, I think life becomes conditioned into a rhythm. So we start off as being a creature that doesn't have a sort of ideological existence. This creature attains an ideological existence. This creature sees beyond the ideological existence. Therefore, it's able to use the ideological existence, and eventually beyond the ideological existence is a rhythmic being, right? So that rhythmic being is non-dual, which kind of is making me feel the whole species is evolving beyond body. So there could be potentially, whether technologically we reach it first or we return to it through nature, there will come a sort of collective being. It's as if like there's this esoteric idea of God entering the body of man, and then it's kind of like, now think of, instead of God entering the body of man, God entering the unknown, manifesting as the ultimate, as a collective known symbol. The content that comes with life is really being able to see things as a designer. It's not just objects that have design. Subjects have various designs in accordance to the selves that kind of look upon that object. There's a story about, I don't know which Zen master this was, but I think it was Shunryu Suzuki, but I could be wrong. It's pretty much this Zen master in his childhood, and people are saying, look at how like aware this being was. So what happens is there's this young kid, imagine, dressed in monk clothing, in a kind of Zen kind of temple like place, and as he's there, Zen monastery, the kid accidentally breaks this really rare artifact that was in the room, in one of the rooms, the meditation room or whatever, you know. And so the kid notices the headmaster, the main, Zen master of the place, kind of like being like walking down the hall. So this kid suddenly picks up the pieces of this broken vase and holds it behind him and walks up to the Zen master as if his hands are behind him out of respect, you know? And he goes to the Zen master and he says, like, I don't know, something like, "Sir, tell me about death. I want to know about death." And the Zen master's like, this young kid, this like 9-year-old kid is asking me about the most ultimate kind of factor that we all human beings need to become content with. He's like, all right, I'll tell him. This kid's enlightened. Like the Zen master is impressed, and he goes on into this very profound speech where he's like, as the leaves change, so do our lives, But anyways, the Zen master says this very profound story and says it's something that we all have to acknowledge. It's something that without it, it's like life doesn't really have meaning. You need space to put furniture in your room. You need absence to have the designs and the visions and the hopes and futures of the human mind. So anyways, the main Zen master, headmaster of the Zen monastery, he says to the kid, yes, it's something we must all acknowledge and there's nothing to fear. Then this kid then says, all right, sir, thank you for sharing. I gotta tell you, your vase died. But I'm happy you have and he gives the vase to the guy. And the Zen master laughs. There's another story where this one comes from Buddha, actually. It's a story of something that happened to Buddha. And one day this lady comes running to, this terrified mother runs to Buddha with her child that has passed away in his hands, in her hands. And she runs to Buddha and she says, "Buddha, you're the blessed one. Please bring back my child. Please." She's freaking out. And people are like, some people have told her the child is dead, but she can't believe it. She can't believe it. She says, "Buddha, you have to bring her back." Buddha looks at this emotionally tormented woman and says, "I will help you, but you have to go get a mustard seed from a household that has had no deaths in it." And the lady's like, "Okay, there's a way." She runs. She runs and she runs. She goes to the first house and she knocks, and the person comes and says, "What is it?" And she says, "Do you have a mustard seed?" And she's like, "Yeah, everybody has mustard seed." And she says, "Okay, and has anybody, like, is there nobody in this family that has died?" And eventually, guys, the whole moral of the story is she goes door to door and realizes that every person experiences the void in their life. For some people, it speaks louder than others, So in that moment, the lady comes back to Buddha and becomes a disciple, The reason was that because she sees that it's the path of, it's like a single vision is worth, a single moment has a potential beyond endless lifetimes, endless loops of manifestation. You see, it's not clear that the human being can receive the answer, but at least the human being can ask the question. Some people get as much joy as finding the right question to ask as much as they find the right answer. How has the sky fallen into your mind? How has your mind arose in your eyes? How does dawn whisper to the darkness? The winds of evolution move us all. A creature has opened its eyes, it has named itself, and now beyond the boxes of language it has placed for itself, it will rise above. The staircase to paradise is the realization of the hollowness of language. This Indian mystic by the name of Kabir, this very liberated, intense figure, you know, in Indian culture. There's literally this thing where it's as if somebody came up to Kabir or something, and then Kabir's disciple was right beside him, and Kabir shouts and he says, "Disciple!" And in some sense the disciple is there and says, "Disciple, tell me, what is God?" He shouts at this person, you know. And the disciple instantly shouts back, "The breath inside the breath." And there is a silence. The breath inside the breath. The moment inside any archetype, any personality, any psychological expression in the moment. Your mind is the sky of your body. And this is why, if the sky is endless, who denies the mind that freedom? Man is in a battlefield. The only way he can step out of this battlefield is by turning it into a playground. You see, in many shows, in many in media, it's kind of obvious. There's a character who beats the final opponent only to realize the last opponent is his shadow self. He has defeated every person. Now the warrior has come to defeat himself. Defeat the tyranny within. Defeat the animalistic instinct that is in some sense clashing with the titan of the mind, you know? You know, it's kind of hilarious. A person, you can say, a mind that has a pet. For example, anybody who's a pet owner right now. Something fascinating. Guess what? You are also a creature in your own governance. You know, the ideas you have of yourself are the leash you wear around the neck of your individual consciousness. And for how long? For how long does the civilization dwell in ideological worship? There's more than language, and when we understand this, that will be the greatest renaissance in the linguistic realm. The greatest renaissance is not an external renaissance anymore. I call it the multidimensional renaissance. It's in some sense where an inner transformation brings such a difference in how the world is seen that the human being marches into the unknown. You see, you don't have time to live because you are alive. Do you know? Every moment is the purpose. Osho tells us, he says, life has no purpose. Life is the purpose, as if people are constantly looking for instructions, for briefings. If people want briefings, which I thought the way the humanity 2. Okay, there's noises coming outside the window, you know. Like, that's not part of the song. I'm listening to music as I talk. Anyways, guys, humanity 2.0 will be, for the first time, we have to, in an imaginary way, befriend the better vision of the future. There's a saying that says, if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. Really, if you want to experience, if you want to live a good life, already consider you're living one. You know? As Leo Tolstoy said, it's like, rather than wanting gold to grow, it's as if, like, in that moment the person has to just take the impurities away. The impurities in the psychological, at least, landscape, or in regards to the subjective realm, in regards to the personhood and the personality, are actions done in moments of inner resistance. That means, let's say you don't want to drink tea, somebody offers you tea, and you're too polite to say no. You know? And so you're drinking that tea, and even though you're drinking that tea and you don't want to drink tea, it's as if it's an indecent, it's in some sense a sort of, it's like the person did not abide by what was real to them. The issue with the educational system is, rather than liberating the individuals that enter the system, they, in some sense, they get defined, they get chained. And dishonor is the worst plague, because dishonor, the moment one sense of honor, which means the value is still there, goes away, the self-value goes away. The moment you are rude to yourself, you allow rude ideas to be in your vicinity, you know, that's the moment where the moment there is an act done that dishonors the self to the story that it was following, the being's intelligence, literally the subconscious, starts acting. What that means is desire and fear amplifies. It's as if, imagine desire and fear being like, whoa, this guy's weak now, let's go, you know, and then desire and fear comes, you know. Let me tell you the thing about weakness. If you know what it is, it's not your weakness. Strength has to be positioned, literally like the chess player has to move the chess piece. In certain subjective domains, the conscious will has to bring forth the reality, you know? And I think what I'm speaking about, I think, guys, is really relevant, because we're all enduring the civilization. You know, we're not, I don't see people waking up and being like, oh my God, what is humanity doing next? Let's help it. People are just getting up and they're like, the world's a messed up place. Let me do what I can. You know, let me just live in my own cave. Do you know how many geniuses are hiding in their caves as I speak? Do you know how many incredible minds, how many incredible people there are, but they do not apply themselves because they feel the story of the world is lost? Because they feel that what they see is the only thing that's there? You know, it's kind of hilarious. Some people wonder about self-deception, only to realize that the self is a deception when it's pure awareness. There needs attention is the secret of the universe. Attention, you know, this is why I think it's like man thought he was at the center of the world, because that's where the attention was. That's where the candle was lit to illuminate the whole cosmos. It doesn't mean that the whole cosmos is based on the candle. It just means that this is as far as the candle can light up. And so human consciousness and brain activity and authentic living, in some sense, opens up a certain range. As I told you, imagine your mind's an antenna. So that antenna, the more honest and decent and simple you are, the more you're able to control it. You see, it's kind of hilarious. There are times where when I was younger, I didn't know about that I could pilot my free will. because I didn't know I couldn't pilot my, like at that time I didn't understand what it meant to pilot your free will. Failure was failure because I stopped looking at the success. Simply said. Just any person whose attention is on something that is true to them, there is a strange power there. The power of your own truth in your own presence. There's something there, guys. The world doesn't have to put on a spiritual mask. It doesn't have to put on an atomic mask. The world is, it can be all seen as a simple moment or endless complex dimensions. Our language is based on the complexity of the world, but our experience is based on what's simply here. There's a story about consciousness. I'll share this kind of experience, guys, I had. A cousin of mine had an incubator where he had an event where I was invited to the event, and in the event, I find myself having a conversation with who I figure out is actually new, like this new, like, you know, I forget the man's name, but he's like this professor who's testing on consciousness and whatnot, and like a researcher in the front lines, you know. And I remember telling him a story. You know, I remember telling him a story, you know, about the story that I want to share now. And I tell him the story, and I just remember seeing him be like, just for a second, you know how when someone realizes something, they're in their inner realm, kind of smiling. They're smiling from the inside. The person could be shocked, but the person could be smiling from the inside, you know. So anyways, the story was that there was this guru back in the day in the forest. He had a bunch of disciples, bunch of people there. And what happens is the guru comes out of his meditation and looks at one of the disciples and he's like, "You." And the disciple's like, "Me?" And he's like, "Yeah, you know. And the disciple, you know, it's all slow motion. He's like, "Me?" Pretty much the guru tells the disciple, "Here's a bucket, go get water from the river nearby, follow your intuition and the noise of the river and you'll find it," you know. And the guy goes to get water. You know, he has experienced enough of the decency of the moment to continue. The guy goes and eventually finds the river, and he puts the bucket in, and as the bucket's getting filled up, you know, for a second he looks to his left and he sees this incredibly beautiful girl, you know. And instantly, in that culture, in that time, what he does is he just forgets the bucket and he goes up there and he's like, "I need to marry you," you know. Something like he falls in love or something like that. And then the girl's smart, and the girl's like, "You got to get my father's permission," you know. And the girl says that, "I'm going to listen from outside the door to if my father gives you his blessing, and then I'm going to get a sense of what kind of mind you have," you know. The man is feels something divine in the moment, the love that he sees, and he continues. He goes. And he finds himself in a room with the father of the girl, and the girl's listening from outside, you know, the door. The father of the girl says, "Who are you?" The father says, "Who are you? You know, like, what's your education background?" And the guy's like, "Education? I'm a yogi in the forest." He says, "I've studied a bit of psychology." The guy is honest and he speaks his truth. And the father-in-law sees this. The father of the girl sees this and says, "Okay, you're a good guy. You can, but under one condition. I've never had a son. I've only had daughters, and you have to stay here in this village forever. And after I die, all my land will become yours." And the father was like a big landowner, you know. They would call him Khans back in the day, you know, like Khan. Anyways, the father gives the blessing. The man is too in love, and beyond the marriage, years pass by. The father-in-law is getting old, and in some sense, the man has a daughter first and a younger son. And the father-in-law eventually passes away gracefully, and life has followed very in a blessed way. And him and his wife one day, and now he's become the landowner, the biggest wealthiest person in the village and whatnot, and him and his wife and his children are standing on the top of a hill, you know, and looking at everything. Suddenly the man notices something shocking, as if there's something, as if his heart has noticed something before his mind, you know. And he looks and he sees a tsunami. He sees waves of water crushing the village, crushing the fields, eventually rising, crushing his house. And he's just there in shock that the whole village is destroyed. And right before he checks to see if his kids are safe, he sees the unthinkable has happened. One of the kids fell. You know, the daughter went to save the son, and the mother went to save the daughter, and all three of them fell in the water. And this man is stunned, out of reach. Before his hand can hold his life has left. And in that moment, there's a chaos. It's as if the universe gave everything and took everything. And in that moment, he hears a voice. And he hears the voice of the guru. And the guru says, "Take the bucket out of the water." And the guy takes the bucket out of the water, and he looks to his left and he sees no girl there, you know. And he gets this instant realization that in one instant he created, you know, his marriage. He created his father-in-law. His mind created a village that he owned. His mind created loss. All of that occurred in an instant. So when I told this to that kind of consciousness professor guy, you know, at the event, I told him, how is it that in one instant the whole stories exist? So how are you measuring it in time? You know? Something like that, guys. I don't know. I find existential contentment comes when you're conscious of your experience, and your meaning is, life is accessible simply and complexly, you know, in a complex way as well. It's kind of fascinating, guys, isn't it? It's kind of like, just think about from an aerial view. If we were looking from like 100 feet in the sky at ourselves, at human beings, we would see like, what is it? It's like a part of nature that is moving in accordance to a significance that is internal. So in some sense, I think it's, guys, human existence, and at least the mind's existence, is the communication between two dimensions, two fields of being, a material field and an immaterial field. I guess, what else can I say? An unknown field. All I know is that there's a potential for this unknown field to be the exact opposite of individual experience. You see, somebody once defined that a system is chaotic unless a sort of stable position is kept in it. So every time any story is entertained, that story needs to have an original position. Think of it this way, that every story is a line, so you got to start from one point and then draw, right? So in some sense, I'm kind of thinking like, direction may have nothing to do with the world. The way the world is moving may have nothing to do with our visible range of reality. I'm saying may, potentially. The person said, how could I have a soul and the whole cosmos to not have one? How can I be part of something and not see the whole system to also be? To be honest, we can't, like, can anybody go up to anybody else and be like, I exist more than you, haha. You can't. Existential value, the same opportunity. But the experiential value is based on how we pilot the attention. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just like 8 billion moments of intelligence being piloted here. And recently, free will has gotten more crystallized into the ego. So anyways, guys, I guess I'll end the talk here. Thanks for tuning in. And what is more important than heaven and earth is to witness the soul of the moment. The soul of the moment is not conceptual. The soul, the word soul, is like the unknown variable in a mathematical equation. It has it. You can give it any symbol, any sound, but it's not a. Some people have thought it's like the attention lives in the breath. We have to immediately confront the tragedy so we can see what's next. What that means is, somebody said this once, don't make kind of don't make others the main character of the story of your life. Something like that. True, like an experiential awareness has a contentment that's being updated in every moment. There's no longer truth games. It's like, what is it? The human being is a lock and truth is a sentence that enters that brain and unlocks it. It's like, it's not just like that. It's life is various states of being interpreting each other as the same moment. It's ridiculous. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.